Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. In 2018, a new generation of metal fans discovered the founders of hair metal, Motley Crue, and the Netflix adaptation of The Dirt, the best-selling book in 2001 written with co-author Neil Strauss. He joins us today on the show to talk about that phenomena, How to Make Love Like a Porn Star by Jenna Jameson, the Game series, and all of his other bestsellers. Neil, we're so excited to have you with us. Thanks again for being on the program. I first started reading your articles back in Rolling Stone magazine when I was in high school. When you were that age, did you already know you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, no, it's funny. If you had asked me, I would have said I was a music person, but we forget so much. And recently my parents sent me all my childhood writing. And I saw in second grade on that big line paper where they have a middle line so you know where to break the middle of the letter. Back when they taught handwriting in school, I guess.
Yeah.
I I wrote when I grow up I want to be when I grow up I want to be a writer. I want to own like a million books and I want to teach my son to ride a bike. And it's so weird to me. I completely forgot it. But in second grade, like my dream was to be a writer. And it's so odd how through the different winding paths of destiny, I ended up back there. I might have even said I want to write books specifically. But it's interesting. I always tell people that the thing that you want to do as a child that has nothing to do with what your parents or teachers tell you is probably close to your calling. And it was so similar. And then on the reading side of things, I still remember like in same year, second grade, so I guess they're connected, that all the kids were reading these checking Hardy Boys books out of the school library and reading them. And so I checked them out and I struggled with them because they're, no pictures, very few pictures, lots of words. And eventually I started reading them. And then I learned that the other kids weren't actually reading them. They were just kind of checking them out to be cool. And then by then I was already sunk into it. And so my attempt to fit in turned out to be the thing that set me apart.
Is it true you actually wrote your first book around that same age?
I wrote a book when I was 10 years old. I wrote a book and sent it out to publishers trying to get it published. It was like a Hardy Boy style of book. So it'd be like the mystery of the clock tower or something like that, as some kind of, two intrepid young lads solving crimes, the funny thing is that this 10-year-old, and it was a handwritten letter with like it said like, here's my address, please send the profits to this address. And here's my photo. I just thought it would get published. And I only got form rejection letters in response, no encouragement, nothing, but it didn't discourage me, and I think as we get older, we need those pats on the back. But back then I was like, oh, cool. I tried. And I just kept, it didn't kill the dream at all. Whereas nowadays, I think as we get older, people often need some kind of encouragement to continue, and to continue because you love it without encouragement seems important.
Out of curiosity, what kind of music magazines were you reading as a teenager, and how important was music to shaping the kind of writing you would go on to do later in your life?
Did subscribe to Cream as a kid, which is fun. To me, that was a regular magazine. I didn't appreciate it. It was really the creme de la creme of this style of rock writing. But I just thought it was so funny. My father was working. My mom was handicapped. So I had a kind of British nanny in the house who could be with us, who was really present in our lives. And I remember she turned me on to music. I remember we went to a record store to buy like a Beatles record. And I was so young, the guy who worked at the record store said, hey, just come back tomorrow. I have an extra copy of I forget whether it's the Red Greatest Hits album or the Blue Greatest Hits album, but I'll just give it to you. Which is funny because it began like a lifetime of getting free albums and CDs and stuff in the mail. But that was I remember she would bring back music magazines from the UK, Melody Maker and Enemy, I think they were, as well as kind of comics. So I think comics, and they were so cool. I'd read these magazines and get into these bands that no one else in school was into. And that really became a large part of my identity.
High school teachers play such an important and often unsung role in helping authors first find their voices as an author. Who were some of those people for you? Anyone in your high school yearbook that really stands out?
But absolutely. There were a couple teachers in high school that I think were way more influential than my college professors. One was a teacher named Mr. Baker, who was he was going to be an Olympic swimmer, and then it was in a car accident, so he was in a wheelchair, but he taught the swim team. And he also taught English, and there was a course on Ulysses, the James Joyce book. And I remember reading this in 12th grade. The main reason I took the class was because at the end you could go to his house and you could drink a Guinness Stout, which would probably never happen nowadays, but I really wanted to drink a beer to see what that was like or whatever it was, or get permission to do it. And that was my main reason to join the class, I think. And when I read Ulysses, I was just blown away by what could be done with words, that it was like hypertext before hypertext, all these things linked to one phrase could symbolize 5 different things and link to 50 other pages in the book. And I was just blown away. And I remember trying to writing a story like James Joyce. Man, now that I think about it, I always was doing writing stuff. So, but that was what really turned me on to literature.
You headed off to college knowing already what you wanted to do, unlike so many kids who get to college and spend the first few years trying to find that out. That must have really helped you speed up your track to go into writing in music.
After high school, I went to Vassar College, and a guy came up to me in school, and he had gone to New York for an internship at a small avant-garde music magazine called Ear Magazine, and he was rejected because he was too well dressed. And I thought, awesome, I'm a slob. This is perfect for me, and I want to be in New York. So I went there and I got the internship. So when I applied from Vassar to Columbia, my grades weren't really that great, but because I was already writing for this magazine, like, I guess my application stood out and I could go to Columbia just because I wanted to be in New York. And was really that idea of being willing to work for free, and do what it took. And that really helped me. I'm really a strong believer in internships, or even just getting really kind of grunt work at a place you want to be around, at a publishing company, at a studio, a writer's assistant, whatever it is, so you can see if it's something you even want to do.
Well, you certainly got off to a quick start. Also writing your first book while you were still in college, Radiotext, correct?
Radiotext was really technically my first book. I don't even know how somehow I got involved with a publishing collective called Autona Media and Semiotext, who do very, very like either academic or radical writing, really cool group. Somehow through Ear, I was on their editorial board, and I would sit there every week in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and meet and discuss these amazing books they were doing. I don't know what I was even doing there. I don't even know how I got there. It's so bizarre. But I think just being, young and hungry and willing to do the work and not wanting anything in exchange, not doing the work to help my career, but just being so excited to be a part of these people who are publishing magazines, publishing books. I was so eager, so eager and non-needy. I think those things will get you far. Eager, non-needy, and useful. I never questioned stuff like, why am I doing this? Or I don't want to do this. It's not for me. So I ended up there, and I remember myself, Sue Ann Harkey, who's a musician and artist, had this idea of doing a book about writings on radio as a revolutionary form of communication and art. And then they said, cool, why don't you make that the next edition of Semiotext, the journal? And I took charge of that journal as this like, I think I was a sophomore or junior in college.
Who were a few of the coolest bands you got to go see live and then meet and write about when you were working for Ear and then the Village Voice?
Even when I was writing for Ear magazine, I started writing for Option, which is another music magazine, which is now defunct, but was awesome at the time. And I didn't let them know I was in college. I remember doing this, like, pre-cell phones, doing calls on the dorm phone and telling everyone, shh, be quiet, I'm talking to my editor in San Francisco. And it's funny, like, I really think people think they need experience, but I'd say my greatest strength that got me this far was naivete, willingness to be taken advantage of. Helped in terms of, I got an internship at the Village Voice. Again, I remember I walked in there. He said, all you're going to be doing is opening my mail and doing my expense reports. Joe Levy was the editor. And I said, awesome. That sounds great. I just want to be there. He really tried to talk me out of it. And then I got there, and I just stuck around. And once I was back, I remember one day I was in Chicago. I was at a Public Enemy Sonic Youth concert, and there was a riot, and the media made it seem like it was about rap and really try to really sort of create a false narrative around it, when in fact it was about the Iraq War, I think, which was happening at the time. And it was about a war protest. So I wrote a piece on it for the Village Voice, and that started me writing. And again, we look at people's stories and we think these things happened overnight, but they really happen slowly and laboriously. And we're grateful for it, because that gives us the experience to take advantage of the opportunity when it comes.
Absolutely.
If I just started writing articles for the Village Voice, I wasn't ready. They would have been horrible. If I just started writing books right away, they would have been horrible. you know so it really like this in a certain degree of the population has, and as it always had it, this sort of entitlement. Oh, they're doing it, I want to just do that. Really doesn't work for you, versus saying, oh, that's interesting, let me be around it, let me learn, let me try to get good at it and get better at it.
Were there any favorite pieces of yours that you wrote during those early days? And which were the ones that first grabbed the attention of Jan Warner at Rolling Stone?
Yeah, I think my favorite piece was a piece on Raymond Scott, who by the way, you asked me what I was writing about for Ear. And I was writing about really avant-garde music, Sun Ra, John Cage, avant-garde jazz, and avant-garde classical. Like, it was pretty cool. It was really cool. There was a rock beat column there, and I did a lot of like anti-censorship pieces that I really liked, and reporting there. I remember I was really into Raymond Scott, who did who was a big band swing composer that Carl Stalling used his music on the basis of the Looney Tune stuff, and a DJ at WFMU named Erwin Chusett had rediscovered him. And I remember I talked the voice into sending me out to LA. I'd never been to LA in my life, or California, couldn't even drive, to meet him. Yeah, to meet him. He had a stroke. He was very old, and going to his garage. It was such a cool moment. And I think that was, and I was writing for the LA Weekly. The other cool piece was going out to Marfa, Texas, to look at the Marfa lights and explore these UFOs appearing over the highway.
Wow.
And to me, the real exciting thing was that I was starting to learn that you could just, as a journalist or a writer, you could just choose anything and say, I can step into this person's life and see what it's like. I can go meet these amazing people. People are trying to connect, say today on Instagram and social media, and hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I'd love some advice. But what's cool is to being saying, hey, I'd love to write a piece on you for the Village Voice, and you can stay with them for days or weeks and step into these worlds and these different lives, and you can go do anything. Like, you can literally go do anything. The sky, any possibility is yours as a writer.
Once you were writing for Rolling Stone, you really had your finger on the pulse of everything that was happening in pop culture, whether it was Kurt Cobain's death or whether it was riding on the back of Tom Cruise's motorcycle while you were interviewing him. Take us back in time to some of your favorite moments from that early part of your career.
Yeah, life is so strange, man. Like, I remember, like, again, I first I remember getting hired at the New York Times. I remember the job position open at the New York Times, and someone said you should apply, and I said I'm not good enough. Not feeling not good enough has really got me far in life. It's surprising. I really want to write a book one day called The Power of Low Self-Esteem, which is like, if I just but then they came to me and said, hey, we'd love you to do some writing for us. And I remember the day I was supposed to do my first review, which is a band called Seaweed at CBGB, a sub pop band. Was my first review as a stringer at the New York Times. Such a big opportunity as a music critic. That's the best. That was the top of the game. Rolling Stone called one morning and they said, turn on the radio. It really shows the time, the time that was. Kurt Cobain just committed suicide, or was just found dead in his Seattle home. Like, oh my God, yeah, we want you to go out there and cover it. And I was like, oh shit, what if I lose my job at the New York Times? But I also realized that this was such a tragedy, but also the generational story of that time. So I remember calling John Perellis, my New York Times editor, and telling him that I would go do that, and he said cool. And going out to Seattle, and I remember I think they got me a one-way ticket, and I think I was out there for a really long time. But really, reporting that story felt like it was such a step into I hadn't taken before, of reporting of competing with real, not writing these stories for the Village Voice that are sort of smart rock criticism, but competing with every national outlet who were being sort of exploitative, when to me, this person was an artist and a musician, not a shocking news headline, but someone who, I related to and so many people related to, and just trying to write something that did it justice. So I think that, again, like, what I really love about Rolling Stone, especially then before artists had social media to communicate, is that artist has worked on that album, and you may be their only way to explain to their listeners and fan base why they created it, what it's about. So they'd really take you in. I remember my first stories with Soul Asylum. and they literally wouldn't let me leave. As a journalist, you try to get access. Here, it's like they wouldn't let me leave. I remember I'd be up at 4 a.m. in Dave Perner's hotel room having to do a New York Times story the next day or something. I think it was my first big story, if I have that timeline right. But he'd be like, he wouldn't let me leave. Like it was crazy. Like it was so weird and exhausting. But I loved, again, anyone who's really at that giant superstar level lives in a surreal reality. So that Dave Perner thing was like me against him in this weird he'd stay up so late that he'd hallucinate. He'd be like, who is that person we were just talking to? I'd be like, there was nobody here. But in my head, I'm thinking, this is gonna be really funny in the article. So the Soul Asylum story, the Tom Cruise story, another secret, by the way, is just to be really non-judgmental. You know, I really respect that humans are imperfect, you know, and all try and do their best in their own confused way. And so I feel like it's safe for someone to share things with me, and I'm not going to use it as a gotcha moment in an article. Some journalists, even at Rolling Stone, do that. But that's not my goal. My goal is to find out what makes someone tick and who they are and explain it in a context that humanizes them, let's say, because we tend to dehumanize these people at this level. So the Tom Cruise story I did, where he took me around all the Scientology buildings and sat down and taught me Scientology. I think he taught me how to ride a motorcycle as well. Like, I just love being on the inside, seeing worlds we can't see, writing about going to Reggio di Calabria in Italy for the New York Times and writing about the mafia and this tradition of mafia folk music. Like, I love being in worlds that we normally don't get access to and seeing it completely.
You collaborated with Marilyn Manson on The Long Road Out of Hell, which really spoke to a lot of disaffected teenagers who went through the same experience. How did that call first come into you?
He got the book deal. He reached out to the editor. Their first choice was actually another writer who passed away. I want to say in a car or motorcycle accident. I'm not sure which. And I was just literally their second choice. I was sort of excited to do it. So he reached out to me through the editor. You know, it was interesting too, because when you're a journalist, you see a certain side of somebody's world because they know it's performance for an article. When you're collaborating with them, you see the full world. And so it's interesting the first time to see the true behind the scenes. With a Long Road Out of Hell, like I guess a lot of my books are for disillusioned teenagers, being one myself. So I think of all the books that I loved, I really love the counterculture, you know, more literature, but I really love the subversive counterculture books, the one they keep behind the counter at a St. Mark's bookshop in New York because they get stolen. Which by the way was a future source of pride when my books were behind that counter. That to me, having the book that's stolen the most is really the greatest honor. You know, like, you know. So I remember with the Manson book, when I remember the day it came out, and that you always going. I think our first signing, I want to say, was Philadelphia, and the streets were closed. It was like dark. It was kind of wet. Kids were just sitting in the gutter reading them. There were like police helicopters overhead, police barricades. It was like kind of, when you create something artistic, you want to feel the world changed a little bit. And I remember that feeling. And also, yeah, like writing those books for those kids, it's just, yeah, it meant so much. Even some kids did stupid stuff, I think, because of the book. But I don't know, you know, we're living in this culture now that really wants everything to be an example, a positive example. But the issue with that is the parts of ourselves that are the shadow parts of ourselves, let's say, the parts that feel like we don't fit in, the parts that don't conform, the parts that are lonely, alienated, angry, having an outlet such as a book or music, where we don't feel so alone with it, helps heal it more than being told how you should be and then feeling not enough. That, I think, that increases the anger and the self-hate.
Your career as a best-selling biographer took a huge leap forward next when you started working with Motley Crue, legendary creators of hair metal, on The Dirt, Confessions of the World's Most Notorious Rock Band. This actually began out of a story you were covering and writing with them on the road for Rolling Stone, right, during the Generation Swine tour?
It was done the Motley Crue way, which is fractious, disorganized, chaotic, and everyone threatened to drop out at any point. Like, I really think, if we're talking about these skills to life, and again, you know, being being likable will really get you far. So, you know, I really like Tommy and Nick and Vince and Mick. Like, they're just such such great characters, and it was so interesting. So I really think that there were points when I remember Tommy got in that fist fight with Vince in the airport, and he was like, "I'm out of the book," or something. There was always some drama to be taken care of. And my friend Ryan Holiday has a book called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and I think it's worth just remembering that title, that all these things that we do, are fraught with obstacles. And your John Corabi book obviously didn't make it through over all the obstacles. I've had some didn't either, and others you really have to sort of fight for them and get involved. And it was crazy how many moments they were ready to sabotage it, and when it came out, they were all just over the moon and so happy. In the realm of co-writing, collaborating, ghostwriting, empathy really gets you far. Like I really love that I can step into these different personalities, even more wildly diverse personalities from my other books. If you really look at that it's really trying to channel them, that my job, like your ego, and you stay out of it, right? You're just there to help them feel comfortable telling you all their stories, and then writing, not as they speak, but writing how they would write if they were a writer.
Fascinating.
Because it's not going to sound how they speak. No one wants to read that. But if they were a writer, how would they write that? So I also was faced with this challenge of how do I do a book? I couldn't find a book that was done by a group before. I'm sure they exist, but I couldn't find one. So, and I love these creative problems and these creative challenges. And so I remember going to Book Soup here and looking for books that have multiple points of view. Rashomon, Wilkie Collins' The Woman in White. I'd already read As I Lay Dying, but looking for books with multiple points of view is sort of a model. And I modeled some of it on As I Lay Dying, that Nikki, as you said, is the headstrong one, so he's Jewel. Tommy's a little bit of Daryl, like the sweet, sort of innocent, one. So I took on I kind of modeled that. And every now and then As I Lay Dying is this family going on this sort of almost pointless quest to bury their mom. And every now and then a neighbor looks in from the outside and sees the ridiculousness of the whole situation. So I'd use Doc McGee or someone else on the outside in Motley Crue's periphery, Tom Zutaut, to provide some perspective. And it became really fun. The only other model I could find was more the Please Kill Me, Legs McNeil and Jillian Carr, I think her name, Jillian, I forget her last name, Carr, I think.
Yeah.
On that book where it's just a bunch of kind of quotes. It's just like a long interview, but I feel that book's amazing, by the way. But I do feel like that format can get tiresome to read. So I went with that. And we had these ground rules too. I've talked about them before, but the ground rules were, it's fun. You really want to set up an intention when you start. And one of the ground rules was you can't read someone else's chapter till it's done. And you can't change what's in their chapter. If Tommy doesn't like what Vince says about him or vice versa, you can respond in your chapter. You can't change that. And it's so, it provides that Rashomon experience of 4 different perspectives of the same scene, and a little bit of interplay of sometimes they found out someone slept with their girlfriend or wife by reading the pages of the book. Yeah.
Talk about a tricky proposition. Tommy had already left the group by this point while you were still writing the book. How did you manage to keep speaking to him without it conflicting with the other band members?
Yeah, I'd go to his house. Yeah, I remember he had this flaming Dr. Pepper machine set up, and that was when he was like friends with working with the Crystal Method, and so I'd go to his house. I'd meet them each in their world.
Okay.
Tommy usually in his home, Vince at the cigar club called the Havana Room, Mick at he never leaves the home in Agora Hills. And again, I would try to. It's just fun if you really take on stuff as like is not a job but a challenge. It's exciting. So remember with Tommy, I'd take words he'd use in his emails to me, and put those words in. Like he's like, I'm just home marinating. So I use the word marinating. I would never use that word. I never even think about using that word, but I would use that. Or Mick, we'd go through his computer. He had all these kind of philosophical essays or thoughts of like, what if Earth is the penal colony for other planets and we're just kind of the Australia of the world or whatever. And so I'd use his writings in there because you really want to channel the artist as much as possible. It's such a fun thing to do.
This band's had so many infamous moments, from Nikki Sixx's fatal heroin overdose, where he then was revived by a paramedic but had died for a minute legally, to Vince Neil's losing his daughter to cancer, and so many other things in between. What were a few of the most challenging and maybe moving moments that you had with these guys as they were really opening up to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nikki's overdose story, like I think there's stories that are easier for artists to tell because let's say there's kind of cool, like I overdosed and survived is a little bit of a badge of pride. But when Vince is talking about losing his daughter Skylar to cancer, like it's the worst pain a human being. What I think, I don't know, as a father, I would say it's the worst pain I could ever think of experiencing ever. I remember him talking about it and me crying. I remember writing about it and me crying. And I think that writing requires the willingness to be vulnerable and open up about the things that are painful or uncomfortable or scary. And that's really where the heart of these things are. And I really think that if I think of one moment that stands out, I'll just remember sitting at the Havana Room and, Vince having a few beers and him talking about that. And then being entrusted with that story to tell it in a way that honors her and his experience of it. I'd really think of that more than the, insanity.
Looking back 20 years later, when you got the book in hand and you saw the Jack Daniels bottle on the cover and the whole beautiful design of it, did you know maybe that there was something special about this book and that it might actually have a chance of getting up the New York Times? I'm sure you didn't expect it to go all the way to number one, become such a phenomenon.
I had no idea. That was it. Yeah, I had no idea. And that was the point. I remember the point I was going to make is you don't know. I was simultaneously working on a book with Dave Navarro. I thought the Dave Navarro book was going to be the bigger one. And again, he kind of got scared and held it up for a couple of years, which happens when you're working with other people. So I really thought that Dave was going to be the bigger one. The Motley Crue one, I was sort of like, who knows? And that really is like, you don't know. As an artist, as a writer, as a creator, you have no idea whether it will succeed or not and why it will succeed. You don't know. And that's why you just have to do it with your head down and do the work, and the rest is out of your control. Things I thought would be big weren't big. Things that I didn't think were big would be big. And I'm sure a lot of people, after you can try to backward engineer it afterward. But the truth is, like, there's a surrender involved in being an artist. And if there's a theme, it's like you just do the work to the best that you can. And then you release it to the world. You move on to the next. And it's up to forces beyond your control to decide what it is and whether it's good. And by the time they've decided, you're already on to the next project.
What kind of advice do you have for the aspiring author that might be watching who has an aspiration beyond journalism to actually go out and write books with bands like this?
I'm sure everybody who does this show says, it's just, here's what worked for me. And people will recommend what worked for them, and realize you're going to cut your own path. So I'm not saying this is general advice, but it really worked for me to ghostwrite books before writing my first book. And what's great about it is you don't have to do the press and the media. There's kind of less at stake, and you really get to understand how the publishing process works. And I'm sure if I hadn't ghostwritten books before doing my own, I wouldn't have had the experience necessary to make it, for it to do well. Just write it for you. The thing is, just like there are so many stories people get stuck in their heads about that are distractions. So just write it for you. Don't worry about the audience. Don't worry about the agent. Don't worry about the marketing. Don't worry about the title. Just vomit what you have to say out there. If you can't write, record it, and then have someone transcribe it and someone rewrite it. Like, you don't even have to. I'm sure there are plenty of writers that probably don't even write their own books, right? So just vomit this mess out there, so that somewhere in these, like, this stack of pages or this giant computer file or this series of audio recordings, what you want to say is there and just needs to be carved. So, we get so precious about stuff, and we think that this is going to be our only book and it has to say everything and accomplish these things. And then we create our own writer's block. To me, writer's block is performance pressure. And if you subtract the performance approval, popularity, sales element from it, you can actually just write. Because again, you can sit down with anyone and say, hey, I'm going to give you a sentence, write off this sentence for 15 minutes, go. And pretty much anybody could do it. Then if you say, and there's going to be a literary critic here that's going to decide whether the fate of your future, depending on what you write, they'll start to choke. So just remove the audience from your mind. The first draft is only for you, and just really get it out there. And we spend more time worrying about what we're going to write. Most people spend more time worrying about what they're going to write than actual writing.
You had your next pop culture sensation with How to Make Love Like a Porn Star, co-written with Jenna Jameson. I myself have the biography with Jasmine St. Clair, one of her main controversial rivals back in the 90s. This became a huge bestseller. What was the most exciting part of writing this particular project?
Judith Regan was my publisher for a lot of my books, for all of them up to that point, who I like adore. Like she is like a real visionary. Like she's like an Ayn Rand, like heroine. She truly is. And I'm so grateful to have worked with her. And she came with, I think, let's see, I did the Marilyn Manson book with her was my first. Then they said, what next? I came with Motley Crue because I'd just done a piece on them for Spin and thought their stories were insane and needed to be documented. And then I think she came with Jenna Jameson. She had commissioned it. The manuscript wasn't working for her. And she said, will you go do this? And I kind of said yes. It was shock. Like, I really thought I was writing this for like, kind of like, let's say for her male audience. But then we go to airports, and again, it just shows you don't know. Because I even thought like, let me make sure I get some titillating scenes in here because they probably like, that's probably what they like about Jenna. But then we go to the airports, and teenage like women would like come up to her and like say, "Oh my God, your book really changed my life." And I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool." Like again, you just don't know. Like the book spoke to women more than men, which I didn't know. You don't know. Like if there's something I can impress, it's like you really don't know, and your intention for it may be different than the result, and that's okay. So, but what I liked about her and Motley Crue and Marilyn Manson, what they have in common is that they stood for something bigger than themselves. Marilyn Manson wasn't just a controversial artist at the time. He really was like the bogeyman of the culture. Someone always fills that role. Next with Motley Crue, they really represented 80s decadence. They weren't just, a sort of metal band. Jenna Jameson wasn't just a porn star. She was the epitome at that moment in time of the ultimate porn star. So I'm looking for people who represent more than just themselves, that they stand for something larger.
You took an entirely different direction with the game, penetrating the secret society of pickup artists. How deeply did you have to immerse yourself in that subculture to actually write the book?
This is something I didn't plan to admit on this because you have so many serious, great authors on the series, but most of my books were motivated by like being very lonely, not being feeling like I'm sexually desirable, just to be frank, not having crushes, unfulfilled crushes, all those things. And then if you look at the books that I chose, there are people who are around a lot of sexuality, whether it's Motley Crue or Jenna Jameson, really trying to figure out how are Motley Crue doing it? Like how, okay, maybe if I'm around Jenna Jameson, I'll figure this thing out, this missing imbalance in my life, especially going to all these concerts. I would review 5 concerts a week for the New York Times. So you're just around a lot of sensuality and sexuality and going on the road with these bands for Rolling Stone and always feeling like you're on the sidelines. I'm just, again, it's weird to, I don't know. It's embarrassing to admit, but it's true. So when my book editor called, Jeremy Ruby Strauss at HarperCollins, worked with Judith, and said, I've discovered this secret society of pickup artists on the internet who are exchanging their tips and tricks. Will you want to compile and write a how-to book? I said, no. I write for the New York Times. I'm a serious author. Like, I don't want to write like how-to book for hard up adolescence or whatever. And then what I did is having the inner hard up adolescent in myself, I then entered that world under a pseudonym, Style, which you had mentioned earlier, and started trying to learn it for myself. And along the way, meeting these larger than life, or maybe I should say weirder than life characters, and this whole sub community, this whole subculture, going back to that theme of going to places where journalists and people are normally not allowed, it was so fascinating. I said I have to write a book that was intended as sort of a experiential journalistic journey through this. And that's kind of how it started. I remember sitting at lunch with Judith Regan in LA, saying, here's what I've been doing for the past few months, because I'm writing for the New York Times. They find out a New York Times writer is online posting their, in these secret forums, asking like how to like do these things. It would destroy my career. And so I told her I've been secretly doing this thing, I said, weirdly enough, I'm sort of becoming like getting some stature in the community so that I could be out in the street and people are like, that style, the pickup artist. Like it was like kind of Donnie Brasco, like I think I gotta write about this. And she just said, go write about it, go do it. This is gonna be great. And that was my first book. That was my first book on my own, which was again, thinking about things that are out of your control. Like it did become a bit of a phenomena. And I really had I just thought, you know, I had such an easy ride. Motley Crue, Jenna Jameson, Marilyn Manson, they already have huge audiences. Now it's me. I don't really have an audience. This is going to be a bit of a letdown. But it's such a crazy story. I have to tell it.
Well, that is more often than not a driving motivator for most authors who want to take chances on the page. With Rules of the Game, the sequel, did you feel like you were doing that?
Yeah. What it was, Judith called and said, hey, will you pull the stuff out and do a how-to? It really, the game wasn't a how-to book. It really was a cautionary story that ended with really like, this thing is like kind of toxic at the end. It's good to get out of it. But then she said, will you do this? It was such a success. She's like, will you do a how-to version? And me having sort of more literary ambitions said, well, I'll do it only if I can do like a bunch of stories that are sort of like literary nonfiction stories that go with it. And that was the 2 books that you were talking about. So we put it in a little package. And one book was like what I try to pull out at the time of like a more sort of kind of how-to element mixed with kind of the stories that show the reality of it, if that makes sense. So that was sort of like just a follow-up.
Emergency, This Book Will Save Your Life, was another chance you took on the page versus taking the safe route of continuing to write bestsellers with rock bands. What made you feel like this particular topic hadn't really yet been explored the way you did in this particular book?
It's very topical now. Like I was thinking I should talk to my publisher about a reissue of it, but what inspired it was, you know, again, like there's really no plan to what I'm doing. And I think that probably is true of most successful people. You're really just following your curiosity and your interest and what you're excited about. I feel like you can't go wrong if you do that. People try to strategize so much, and it might give you a sense of safety, but it doesn't really give you any more success, maybe even less than you would otherwise. So I think, just follow my curiosity and my interest. 9/11 happened, and it really was a wake-up call to America that okay, these things that happen elsewhere can happen here. Then of course, you know, we start doing the same. Then I remember Hurricane Katrina happened, and you saw sort of bodies floating down in the water in an American city, and you thought, oh, they were kind of wake up calls. The first one is that these acts of violence and terror, you know, can happen here. We're not safe from war. And the second one was that even these disasters that we know are coming, even though they're supposedly the most powerful country in the world, there's nothing we can do to stop them, prevent them, save people from them. So I realized that I needed to start I wanted to learn to take care of myself. You know, all that background I've been talking about, like none of that really ever teaches you the things you might learn growing up in different backgrounds and communities. Like I really don't know how to do anything practical, right? If there was an apocalypse, we were in a cave and deciding who had useful skills and who had to be eaten, like you don't really need a journalist. You know, you don't really need the guy who hung out was on the road with Motley Crue for a year. You know, you want the doctor or the carpenter. So I kind of embarked on this journey to create safety outside of the system, to be self-sufficient, to learn how to go into the woods with nothing but a knife and the clothes on my back and survive, to get a second citizenship to another country in case something happened. All these things that people are probably doing now in America. So the book really was about this sort of journey from being living in your head, let's say, to really truly being able to take care of yourself, and looking at not relying on the system.
Every journalist loves at some point in their career to look back over the catalog of interviews that they've amassed. When you got ready to work on Everyone Loves You When You're Dead, Journeys into Fame and Madness, what was most fun about going back into that archive?
That was laborious because Everyone Loves You When You're Dead was my version of an anthology, and I could have done this is the sad thing, and it's true. I thought I'd do an anthology. I thought it's time to emergency. It was so much so much work, and writing it, researching and writing. I thought, let me just put an anthology of all my favorite pieces for Rolling Stone, the New York Times. And the sad thing was, when I went back to look at probably over 2,000 pieces for the New York Times, and you know, so many for Rolling Stone, very few were still interesting. You know, all that time writing and all that sort of, let's say, diluted self-importance, very few I felt stood up to the test of time. You know what I mean? It's like, do you really want to just a few articles? And so what I thought instead was, what if I go back and take all my interviews that I've ever done, just because I've interviewed everyone you can imagine, you know, like, not everyone you can imagine, probably some people I haven't, but everyone who I've always wanted to interview, let's say, who was alive, whatever it might be, from Paul McCartney to Lady Gaga or what have you, to Genesis P. Orge of Psychic TV to Sun Ra, right? Just across Britney Spears, like whoever, anyone, like so many interviews. It's insane the amount, because when I was writing a weekly column for the New York Times, whoever was coming through town, I would interview, or Clapton, whatever it may be. So I thought, what if I go back to the interviews, get them retranscribed? Again, I had a medical transcript retranscribed, and find the moments of true, raw honesty. Not like, oh, what made you record that album? What were your inspirations? But like finding real human moments of fear, vulnerability, really relatable human insecurity, finding those real human moments that you look for as a writer, those moments of truth. And then I sort of painstakingly went through all these interviews, and then compile all those moments and put them together in sort of a fugue where they just all sort of fold into each other. It's funny. It's really it's probably the least successful of all the books, but my favorite, because I feel like through the course of the interviews, from my first interview in, at college radio or Ear magazine to the latest Rolling Stone cover story, I could see myself evolving to, I was talking to you about that desperation I had growing up, and I see me interviewing Led Zeppelin and only being Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, and just really being fascinated about their sex stories, to me later asking about marriage and fathering. So I felt like the secret why that book's so close to my heart is I see myself growing up, and I see myself doing these interviews, looking for mentorship from people who had such a wider degree and platform of life experience than me. So I don't know, that book is really close to my heart.
I bet it meant a lot to your fans too, who grew up reading those articles and listening to those bands and discovered a lot of them through your words. Is it true that a conversation with Rick Rubin actually inspired The Truth, an uncomfortable book about relationships?
The Truth began like all the other books we've been talking about, which is me experiencing a problem in real life that I can't solve. With the Game, it was dating. With Emergency, it was survival and fear. And with Truth, it was intimacy. And all my relationships imploding in different ways, and having a discussion back to music with Rick Rubin, and him saying, maybe you're a sex addict. If you look at the theme we've been talking about, it's really not surprising. It's funny, these things that and The Truth might be my favorite book now that I think about it. But these themes, that if you look at the theme running through this stuff and what we've been talking about, I was like, I thought, I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm not like doing anything unhealthy, but I was like, you know what? In the interest of exploration, I said, maybe you're right. Checked myself into sex addiction rehab. And there, my mind was just blown open. At first, I was really in resistance to it. I hated the whole thing. But at one point, we went through my sort of timeline, my personal history. And I always thought I was the sane one writing about the crazy ones. I'm just on the bus with Motley Crue. I'm just on the Scientology thing with Tom Cruise. They're all these wild, eccentric characters, and I'm just the sane one telling people, the normal one telling people what it's like. And that was a moment when she opened up my whole back history, my whole background. All of a sudden, I was like, oh my God, I'm one of the crazy ones too, and realized it was just a moment when all of a sudden my whole past came into focus like a movie, and that I was living and didn't know it. There's a quote from Carl Jung, which is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. Meaning that I was living through this programming, but I didn't know what the programming was that was destroying my relationships, and also made me very empathic. Probably empathy comes from being, being my mom's confidant, being what they call enmeshed. And that book changed my life more than anything. Even like the game and Emergency and The Truth, those books, even if I never wrote them, my life was so transformed, it would have been worth the experience. The game showed me I could change. I didn't have to be stuck. It's just stuck with myself. It told me self-improvement was possible. And The Truth really got me into deep psychology and my beliefs, and I wouldn't be the same person without that journey. So The Truth was about intimacy and relationships and healing that. And it's such a cool job. You go back to being a writer, and you're about to say something. But last thing, it's such a cool job being a writer. I'm trying to sell it now, but advocate. But it's true, because you can take an experience that you want to have, and that can be your job. To heal yourself can actually be your job, instead of just something you do as a with the money you save up from your work.
From rock and roll to relationships, your book signing lines must be quite eclectic in terms of the titles that particular fans are holding. Does it make you feel good to know you've reached so many different readers?
It happens every day, whether someone's like, I met my wife because of the game, or The Truth just opened my eyes to these patterns, and now I'm in therapy. It's like, yes, that's literally what it's about. So we talked about the creative part of just getting it down there for you, but then the second part is sharing it, right? Part one is creating it. Part two is sharing it, right? And the fact that you share it and it resonates with others, helps you just feel connected to others, and you actually have a purpose here that's not just about your own. It's not just about yourself. And for sure, what a great, we strive to do so as parents, for those of us who are parents, and as as human beings. If you're having what appears to be a positive effect on others, it's the greatest. And if you do it by just sharing your experience, and you're just vulnerable, and it's scary, and there are actual real world consequences for sharing your truth, and you brave those to get to help others, it's a beautiful thing. I talk to so many people who want to work with me, and I'm sure you do as well, who want to work with you, who are scared to tell the truth. But the fact is, if you get over those fears, the things you're most scared about are the ones that will most resonate and help others.
What about the book that's meant the most to you personally in terms of the difference it's made in your own life?
It would be The Truth. Probably because it's the most recent one, but I feel like that's my soul in a book. Maybe Everyone Loves Me Dead is my past in a book, and The Truth is my soul in it. And I took it really is.
You've been hosting a podcast for the last 5 years to live and die in LA, which I imagine has got to have provided fertile ground for new book ideas. Tell us a bit about the podcast and also what's coming up next.
Just going back to storytelling, I've been through my then wife, Ingrid. She found out about a person who went missing in Malibu, where we live. And we just got together with Mike Einziger of Incubus, the guitarist, and his wife, Anne Marie, who is an amazing violinist, plays with Hans Zimmer. And we, just as neighbors and community members, wanted to help. Every book never started as a book. There's another pattern, except for the collaborations. It really started something I was doing for my life that then seemed interesting enough to share. So it's not intellectual or analytical. It really is following your feeling and your interest. So we started trying to help this family find this missing person, and that turned into this podcast, To Live and Die in LA, which became this #1 iTunes podcast. Again, another thing that was out of my control. And I think I just trust my curiosity, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But to leave with that Joseph Campbell quote, the insecure way is the secure way. You choose secure paths, such as for the money, and then you lose a job and you spend the money, you have nothing. But if you choose your passion, the stuff you love, the stuff you're afraid of, even if it doesn't work out, you've created something you love and you're proud of. So I always think of that path, that quote, the insecure way is the secure way.
Please leave viewers with a few sage words on the craft of writing before we go.
So advice for authors, and I think we've covered a lot of it within this, which is everyone who's giving the advice is what worked for them. It may not be what works for you, right? Your path is going to be unique to you, so you don't have to follow a map. These suggestions you're getting from myself in this series, they're starting points. Number two, you won't figure things out intellectually by thinking about them, what your passion is, what your book is. You figure them out by doing them, right? So if you're so just do, and even if what you start is not right or not perfect, will lead you to the thing that's right and perfect for you if you surrender and trust the flow. Three is have no plan and have no marketing plan until the work is completely done. Just surrender to the work, surrender to the process, work hard. And if you get stuck, some people use marketing like I got to find the right title, and it becomes a form of procrastination. Just do it. Fourth thing is, do not, when you're writing, get all critical voices out of your head. People internal, well, this could be a legal issue. This might upset so-and-so. Just write the truth. If you're writing a nonfiction book, write the truth as it happened to you. No one's going to see that draft. Later, when you're done, you can change it. And the stories matter. The names don't really matter. So if you want to change somebody's name, change their name. It's the story that matters, and just put a disclaimer at the beginning of the book. But do not, I get questioned first-time authors all the time. Well, what about, is this legal or what? It doesn't matter. Just write the thing. And then later when you talk to a lawyer, you can figure out if you need to change anything. But those questions are just distractions. No one's going to see that first draft. And I always say, write the first draft for you. And my first drafts are horrible. Write the second draft for your audience. Make that thing that tells your whole story. Now make it interesting to somebody else, which might require, getting rid of parts that you worked for weeks on, getting rid of parts that you felt were important when you started to write the book. There's a lot of sacrifice. Rick Rubin and I talk about the brutal edit, meaning like if you've written 500 pages and the book is supposed to 350, try to get it to 250 pages. Try to get even shorter. Then you can add some stuff back later, but really, really streamline it. I spend more time cutting sometimes than I do writing. Lastly, the third draft. So the first is for you, second is for the reader. The third is what I call for the hater. So then you think of all the criticism you're going to get, all the possible lawsuits you're going to get, all the fact-checking quibbles you're going to get on the Amazon reviews, and then you sort of hater-proof it. You make sure your facts are down. You make sure your legal stuff is down. If there's a counter-argument, you include it in there. Some people might think so-and-so happens, but the truth is blank. You just, almost like an Eminem song, he's already responded to all his haters within the song and all the criticisms. He's got all the bases covered. So I feel like those are the three kind of overall drafts. And the last thing is just don't second guess yourself. There's a point where people are revising books where they start making it worse, right? And if that happens, just stop. Do what it takes and don't worry about how it's been done before. To use another Joseph Campbell quote, he goes, "The wasteland is living in terms of how things were done before instead of in terms of innovative thinking."
Neil, thanks for all the great books over the years and for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Bye, man.